Hello, Chris Keyack here with Keyack Technology Solutions. In this video today, I'm going to talk a little bit about the classic Tekla Structures properties dialog boxes. So watch this. If I double click on the background of the 3D view, this opens up a classic dialog box. I can actually drag this and move it around, even move it to another monitor. And basically you'll see some common things in these classic properties dialog boxes. Save, load, and save as at the top. And then there's this OK, apply, modify, get, and cancel along the bottom. And this is pretty common. Now, what's happening is over many years now, Tekla Structures has been trying to migrate more and more away from these classic dialog boxes because really, honestly, it's sort of a unique system of actually inputting properties and doing things in Tekla. And oftentimes you can have many different dialog boxes open at one time. And so it sort of feels like, oh, wow, there's all these dialog boxes that are popping up and sort of getting in the way of the screen. So what Tekla is more and more nowadays doing is if I double click on this part here, it's actually showing properties panes over on the right hand side. And when I click on different object types, the property panes adjust and are dynamic to whatever context of the object that you're selecting. And so there are some different nuances and behaviors between the properties pane versus the classic dialog box. Now I got to tell you, I'm a professional trainer at Tekla Structures, and this is often like very difficult to basically teach new users. They have to kind of go through a double learning curve of learning this classic style and then the properties pane. And there are save settings, for instance, at the top of the properties pane, and then there's save settings here at the top of the classic dialog boxes. One key difference, just to start out though, is that if I select some settings here, nothing changes unless I press the load button. Over here in the properties pane, when I select some settings, it actually loads. And if it's actually on an existing object, it actually intuitively shows you some of the differences of things from the loaded file versus what's actually currently applied on that object in the model. And so there is no save as, for instance, button in the properties. So that actually messes people up, especially when they want to just save and update settings. Now, over the years, I've been watching Tekla continue to try to bring some of the good things that came from the classic dialog box into the properties pane, like kind of showing when you've changed something in here. Like watch this, I'll just add some text and it actually tells you, hey, you've changed something in the settings compared to what was saved. You want to update that and save that away. It actually used to wipe that out and then you'd have to retype the whole thing in there because there was no like save button of something existing, and every time you pick something, it automatically loaded it. Some other things like having an apply button if you want to set as default to remember certain settings or not when you've loaded them into properties. Then all these copy paste features and basically the copy to another object with this paintbrush. All these are features and things that I've seen over the years added to the properties pane to try to return back to this. Now, again, I want to help you not have to deal with the frustration of trying to understand these two different systems. Now in this video, I'm going to focus on the classic dialog box because this seems to be the one that is the hardest to get understanding and working, and you will have to deal with it. You're going to see it right away when you're doing your models because you're going to create views using this, and then you'll also see it commonly in all of the connections. So watch, if I load up shear tab connection here, 146, any of the classic Tekla Structures connections or even custom components that you build are all going to depend on this classic dialog box of save, load, save as at the top, and then the apply, modify, and get and cancel and things like that on the bottom, and then all of these checkboxes and that are next to all the fields that many people don't understand. So let's go ahead and dive in, and I'm just going to really showcase this here in the workflow related to the view properties because it's one of the first things that you're going to experience when you're doing your modeling. Okay, so the very first thing here is that I want to create a new elevation view on grid line B. So, first thing is the easiest way to get to the view properties dialog box is to double click on an existing view, which is usually going to be your 3D view. And that's what I'm actually seeing here is the properties for that object that I double clicked on, and that object just happens to be the view. And so I know that this is the view that's being selected because I see this golden border of awesome that is around the view that tells me that that view is selected. Now, when I do that, I'm going to create an elevation view though, so I need to load some saved attributes or settings away to do an elevation view instead. Now, the out-of-the-box US environment has this elevation view settings, and I can press the load button. So here it is. I've already done this so many times mechanically that I was almost going to talk myself through it and show you what you need to do, but let me show you what new users experience. I'm going through training, or they're learning how to put views in, and they're going to go to the save settings and they're going to pick that elevation, but then nothing happens. And because there are so many fields on this dialog box and they're kind of a bit overwhelmed trying to figure out what is it that they're trying to do to create the view, they don't really realize that nothing has changed when they click this. It's kind of not intuitive. Most modern software, including the properties pane like I just showed, when you load that, it will load those settings. Now here I have to actually press the load button. So just like I was showing before, I just wanted to recap that in order to load those settings into the dialog box, I have to press the load button after I select those attributes. Now, the next thing here is that new users think that, well, okay, once it's loaded in the dialog box, it's applied. It's ready for me to go ahead and start putting in a new view, but it's not. You actually would have to come down here and press the apply button in order to remember the settings that are in this dialog box for the next new view that I'm about to create. So that's the key for your notes when you watch this video. When you change some settings in here, and in this case here, I'm actually going to say frameline B, I need to press apply for it to remember those settings before I create my new view. Okay, now watch this. Here's what new users do all the time. They think that the modify button is what you do in order to create that new view and to remember those settings. Like you're modifying the settings in the dialog box, and that's not how it works. Modify will actually change anything that is existing in the model that is currently selected. And like I said, the golden border of awesome shows around this view that this is the current view that's selected. And guess what? Up here at the top of Tekla, this view is called 3D. Its view depth is 50 feet. It is in a 3D basically rotation here for the angle. And if I hit modify right now, which I'll do it, I'll show you what happens, and then this freaks people out. They press modify, uh-oh, I just changed that existing selected view to all these properties. So when they go back to their view list, what happens? Uh-oh, I don't have my 3D view. What did I do? How did it delete? I didn't do anything to it. Where did it go? It's because they loaded these properties and they hit modify, and it modified that existing selected object. Don't do it, okay? So if you do accidentally do it, no problem. Let's just go in here before we do anything else and we'll load up 3D view. But look at this. I want to show you the other thing users do before I actually fix this. I want to show you the next thing they do. They might hit modify, but then they might also hit apply too. Okay, because they're like following along or trying to kind of create the views and they're like can't remember which one they need to do. So they might hit modify by accident first and then they hit apply. Well, watch, if I go to new view using 2 points with these applied or stored settings, now the next new view I create is going to try to use those applied settings. Now it creates the new view and I'll interrupt. But the issue here, and if I just come to window, tile vertically, look at what happens. I have a new view called frameline B with parentheses around the name. And then I have the 3D view that I accidentally modified that says frameline B in the name. Now, what is the difference between the parentheses versus the non-parentheses? Well, you cannot have a permanent view or more than one permanent view with the same exact name, right? So I can't have frameline B twice in my permanent views list. And so what Tekla does is if you are trying to create a new view again with the same name of something that already exists, you get this view name with parentheses around it, which means it's a temporary view. So if I close this view, it's now gone forever. If I go back to the view list, there is no frameline B with parentheses on it. It was a temporary view because the parentheses around the name means it's temporary. Okay, so now I don't have my 3D view. I do have a frameline B, but people are confused. So first of all, let me actually just go back and show you how to fix this existing view. So I'm going to just double click on this, and then that opens up and loads those properties. I'll load up 3D by selecting it and pressing the load button. And now this is the perfect opportunity to show how modify works. I want to actually modify this existing selected view intentionally. So I'm going to press modify, and there we go. It comes back to 3D. The view depth is now back to 50 foot up and 6 feet down, and the angle is set to rotated to 3D. So there we go. That's how I restored that. Now, in case things really got messed up where you close this down and say like your 3D view didn't exist, like you were really in trouble, right? Like you're like, oh my gosh, how do I get this back? Here's another great opportunity to show how to apply a view. So let's say I have no views open at all. On the view menu at the top of Tekla, I would go to view properties. That'll open up that view properties dialog box. And in this case, when there's no view to double click on, it just loads the last applied properties. Now, just in case, I'll select 3D view. press load, so that way those settings would load, or I make sure that they are loaded, and then I'll press apply to store those settings for the next new view or new thing that I'm going to create. So apply, I'll then go to new view, basic view, which is going to create a plan view. And the default 3D view in Tekla when you create a model is actually created at the 0, 0 elevation, and the view plane is flat in the world in the X and Y. So I'll just say create, and there we go. Now our 3D view is back. So if you ever need to get your 3D view back, that's how you do it. Open up view properties, load 3D, apply, new view, basic view, and create, and there you go. Now, I want to show you a couple other things here, right? So far, we explained that apply stores the settings for the next new thing that we're going to create, and modify changes anything that's existing that's selected in the model, and it will modify those properties of that particular selected object. Now, everybody thinks that these checkboxes next to all of the fields in all of the dialog boxes, especially in connections, they think that these are on-off switches, like that this is going to turn this thing on or off. That's not what these are. These are affect and modify checkboxes. Now, what the heck does that mean? Okay, and what is it for? Why would I need something like this? Well, the example would be that down here, there's this check all and uncheck all button. So when I press this little button, it unchecks all the affect and modify checkboxes next to all of the fields. Now, what that means is that let's say that I come in here and I load up the MBS frame line settings. So I'm going to load those settings, and you'll see that it loads a bunch of different things in here. And if I uncheck all the checkboxes and only check the angle basically property or field here, and then I have this 3D view, you can see that the name is 3D up here at the upper left. But look at the dialog box. The name is Frameline X, right? And I don't want that name to be modified on the 3D view. The only property that's in the dialog box that I want to be adjusted is switching from 3D to plane. So if all these other checkboxes are unchecked and I press modify and only the angle one is checked, then only that specific property that is checked in the dialog box is going to be affected during the modify. Anything that's unchecked will be ignored and not affected during a modify. So this check and uncheck all boxes basically quickly allows us to control which settings are going to be affected during a modify or not. Now, you can do it the other way around too. You can just uncheck specific fields or properties that you don't want to be affected during a modify, and then leave the rest open, so that way you can quickly do that. So far, those are some of the key things to understand. We talked about apply remembers the settings that are in the dialog box for the next new thing you're going to create, or new view in this case. Modify would actually change something that's existing, and you actually saw me do that in action. Then the uncheck and check all checkboxes allows me to turn off or turn on the checkboxes that are affected for the properties during the modify. And then next, we'll just explain the last couple of buttons here. So let's say that I have this view selected in the model, and it is called 3D, and it has some different properties than what's actually shown in the dialog box. If I press the Get button, that will just load the settings of whatever object is selected in the model into the Properties dialog box. Now, the equivalent of that is actually just double-clicking. So if I just double-click on any object, including the view here, then it loads up those properties in the dialog box. Let me just show that. If I go to a different set of settings, press Load, those are now loaded in the dialog box. But if I double-click on this view, it loads those settings. Same thing here. If I just select something else, and then I press the Get button, that's the same thing as double-clicking on that selected object. So that's what the Get button does. Now, here's the next thing that usually messes people up. Is they're like, okay, well, I don't get it. What's the OK button do then? And what's the cancel button do? Right? What's the difference? And then even on top of that, a lot of people are used to closing dialog boxes by clicking the X at the upper right-hand corner. Now, so you understand what's going on, is typically in dialog boxes, especially like connection dialog boxes, the X button here at the upper right-hand corner and pressing cancel is basically like closing the dialog box. It closes the dialog box without applying any of the settings. So cancel and this X at the upper right hand corner of the dialog box, that's the same thing usually. Okay, so that means closing the dialog box without applying or remembering the settings that are in the dialog box, unless you press the apply button first before you press cancel or the red X here at the upper right. Now, the OK button, however, will close the dialog box, but it will remember the settings by applying first. So, if you're an old school user like me and you watch me do training, I tend to say, hey, hit apply and then okay, just because I'm so used to back in the day, you used to always have to hit apply and then okay. And nowadays, when you hit OK, it actually closes the dialog box, but it applies the settings automatically first, whereas cancel doesn't do that. However, there is one little nuance in the view properties dialog box that does not follow that logic. So let me show you. If I come in here and let me just load up standard. Okay, so it looks like some temporary view settings are loaded here. So I loaded those and I did not press apply. I haven't pressed apply at all. I just loaded them up. And usually when you hit cancel, then those settings will not be remembered because I didn't hit apply. If I go back to the tiny view properties dialog box up here at the top, or the button, look at what it did. I don't know why it does this. This is not how it's supposed to behave, but technically when I hit cancel, those properties shouldn't be remembered. But the view properties dialog box is the only classic dialog box in Tekla Structures I know of that does not follow the principles of pressing the cancel button without pressing apply. So in this particular case here, let's just load up some different settings. When if I don't hit apply, see how crane plan is there? If I just hit OK and then I go back to view properties, it automatically applied those settings when I closed it, and now it's applied when I reload it. Now in every other dialog box, this cancel behaves properly. So watch, let me just go ahead and go back to that awesome example with clip angle 146. So if I double click on this here and I open that up, and let me just load up, let me just go somewhere where I can see some settings, right? Like I'll type in 4 bolts and I'll do 3-inch spacing, 1.5, and then 1.5, and watch. I have these settings filled in the dialog box. And sometimes you actually want to fill some stuff in, select some things in the model and press modify, but you don't want those settings to be applied for the next new connections you're going to put in. You were just trying to modify something. That's also why it's sometimes handy to just turn off all the checkboxes, pick a couple fields, select lots of connections in the model, and only modify those things without modifying accidentally other properties about all those different instances of those connections. You just want to modify a couple of properties, do what you need to do there, and then you want to press cancel. So watch, remember those settings I just filled in, I press cancel. Now if I double click on that 146 connection again, go back to bolts, look at that, none of the settings are there. Now if I intentionally want to remember those settings, okay, I'm going to do 4 bolts, 3-inch spacing, 1.5 inches top and bottom. Then what I'll do is I'll press the apply button and it will remember those settings, and if I close, then it's going to apply and close that. If I go back in here to open that up, which should then open up the applied settings, go to bolts, you're going to now see that those settings have been applied. Now watch this, I'm going to change it to 5 this time, and I'm not going to press the apply button. I'm just going to press OK. When I do that, then basically it still is applying and closing the dialog box. Let me go back and open that up, bolts, and sure enough, there is the 5 bolts. So the OK button traditionally is like pressing apply and closing the dialog box. Pressing the cancel button, just to show that again, let's say 6 here. And then if I press cancel or I press the X at the upper right hand corner, which I'll do that in this case, when I do that and then double click back on here, we'll see that on the bolts it did not apply that 6 because I hit the cancel button or the red X at the upper right hand corner. So that's how the OK button versus the cancel button and this close button at the upper right hand corner work. Okay, so I came back here to the view properties dialog box to talk about the last couple items on the classic properties dialog boxes. Well, the first thing here is that there is a save button, load, and then save as. And a lot of people ask me, I don't really understand what's the difference between save versus save as. So what's going on here is if I select a existing setting in the dialog box, let's say that I select this crane plan, okay? So if I select this and press load, right, it loads those settings like we saw before. And now if I change some things, so I'll just say, crane plan 5 as an example, then what I can do is in the save as, I can type in that 5 and then I can say save as, and now it will add that to the drop-down list. So it's creating a new saved attribute or saved settings file in the model attributes folder. So the difference here is that if I change this and I put like maybe an underscore, and I'm like, okay, cool, I just want to save on top of that existing setting that I already have here. That's what the save button's for. So the save button will remember the current settings based on whatever name is loaded here in the dropdown. So I can't change the name or type anything here. I can just basically choose from the existing settings and press save to overwrite those existing settings names. Now here I can do the same thing. If I left this at MBS Crane Plan 5, I could just hit save as and it would overwrite the existing file. But if I wanted to make a new one, here, let's say 6, I can only do that with the save as, and then it adds that to the drop-down list. Now, a lot of people also ask me, okay, well, what is this doing? Where is this actually putting this? Where's this settings being stored? Is it going in my firm folder automatically? And no, it's not. It's always being set in your model attributes folder. Well, where's that at? I'll go to the Tekla menu, open model folder. That'll open up File Explorer, and this is now the model folder that this is in. If I go to the attributes subfolder, sort by date modified here at the top, we'll see that there's the new files that I've been creating, and I can take those and I can cut or copy those over into my firm folder so I can use those for other jobs and see those universally across my organization. And that's a great way to save time and use your default company standards or settings. And you can do that in properties panes as well as any of the classic Tekla dialog boxes. Now, the next thing to understand is that there's unfortunately no rename. So if you actually save something with the wrong name in here, you actually got to go back into that attributes folder. So let me do that. Let me just go back to open model folder, attributes. And let's say I want to get rid of this MBS Crane Plan 6. So I'll delete that out. Now, the only problem is that the 6 is still going to appear in the dialog box because these actually get loaded when the model gets loaded or when that dialog box opens for the first time. So now on these classic dialog boxes, you actually have to reopen the model. So I'll do that and I'll save the model. And then when I reopen and then I go back into those view properties and I go to the drop down, now that that attribute file is no longer in the model attributes folder, then basically it's not going to appear there. So that's the only way I know of to delete something that you don't want there anymore or that you wanted to rename and you accidentally saved it with the wrong name. So watch, let me double click and there it is. See, there's no MBS Crane Plan 6 anymore, just the 5 because I deleted out the 6 file. Now, the last key thing here is that whether you're in the properties pane or you're, so like over here, watch if I just go ahead and click on this, whether you're in the properties pane, you can see that there's a standard file up here at the top, or you're in one of these classic properties dialog boxes. Anytime you save anything away in the properties pane or these classic dialog boxes with the word standard, and I typically keep it all lowercase just so that way it's consistent with how Tekla does things. If you save anything as standard, that will be the default settings that are automatically loaded and applied by Tekla whenever the model is opened. Okay, so if I saved these 3D settings as standard, now when I reopen the model, then that's what's going to be loaded in the dialog box. And I do this a lot with my properties panes. So here on standard, you can see that this is like the classic Tekla out of the box standard settings. But if that's not my common setting here, like that's not my common beam size or the common prefixing that I want for my piece marks, I'll change that to whatever I want, and then I'll save that as standard, and then put that in my firm folder so I can remember that. Now, one thing I really do like about the classic dialog boxes is that you do have this save as separated from the save. Let me just show one last thing and one last tip in this kind of video here related to the properties panes. There's unfortunately no separate save as versus save. So this messes people up all the time. They come in here and they load up some different settings, and let's even just do it this way. Like we're going to activate like we're putting in a new beam command right here. So if I come in and I load up some settings, this is one thing that's handy is that if I do change something here, look, it will retain the name at the top, and then I can basically, as long as it's a good property. So that's actually kind of cool. Tekla won't let you save any bad properties there. So let me just put braces as an example. And it italicizes the text and puts an asterisk telling you you've changed something from what you've different than the properties you loaded. Do you want to save with the same name and update that? And if you do, it will remember that and do like a save on top of those existing settings. However, here's where things go wrong. If I wanted to save this as standard, I cannot come in here and click standard because then it's going to load standard. That's the unfortunate thing about the automatic loading when you pick on something. Well, it gets even worse. If I come back in here, or even more confusing, and I say S, and then I want to come up here and I'm like, okay, hey, I need that to be standard. So clearly I can't select on standard because that's not going to work. So then what you do is you start typing in standard, and look, it shows that autofill preview. So what does everybody do? They hit enter, and then it usually it actually loads that full word standard there and then loads the settings. Or if I keep going and I start typing, I'm like, oh cool, my natural inclination is to click that because that's what I'm trying to do. But what does it do? It actually loads up standard. That's not what I wanted. So whenever you're trying to completely overwrite some settings and the name's not in the top of the dialog box there, and you want to actually save those as an existing setting, you actually have to type in the full word and then come up here. Don't click, don't hit enter, don't hit tab. Just type in the full word that already exists in the dropdown and press the save button, and then it will replace those existing settings. So that's my last kind of tip there. That is usually trips up people compared to the old properties dialog boxes, especially old fart users like myself. And I hope that this video really helps you get started in understanding the difference between the classic properties dialog boxes and some of the nuances and differences that you have to make sure you understand, especially with apply and modify, compared to working with the newer properties panes on the right hand side of Tekla.